Solo Leveling by Gong. Chapter 72 The Trap. Kree. As soon as Jinwoo issued the command, the bugs he had felled a few minutes ago rose to join his shadow army. Jinwoo had revived magic beasts as his soldiers plenty of times in the past, but these new shadow soldiers were on a whole other level. Previously, the shadow versions used to be weaker than when they had been alive due to the system suppressing parts of the Shadow Monarch's power. Now that Jinwoo had taken on the mantle of the Shadow Monarch, his soldiers were able to reach their full potential. Kree. Black steam exuded like flames from the new shadow soldiers, who were stronger than ever before. Naturally, the more powerful the denizens of chaos were, the more powerful Jinwoo's extracted army would be. The very strength of the army of destruction that allowed it to wreak such havoc would now be its downfall. Jinwoo gave the animated new recruits their first command. Go get him! Scraw! The bug-type shadow soldiers charged at the denizens of chaos. Jinwoo followed soon after, quickly overtaking them and jumping straight into the nearest pack of beasts. Roar! The group of flustered orcs and ogres randomly swung their weapons to no avail, as Jinwoo effortlessly avoided them and responded with an attack of his own. The magic beasts were blown away as if a storm was sweeping through their midst. Every time Jinwoo wielded his daggers, the black aura stretching out from the blades crushed not only the orcs, but the ground they stood on. The orcs and ogres were slaughtered before they could even scream. At that very moment, the sky above Jinwoo grew dark. Growling, there stood a giant so tall, Jinwoo's neck hurt as he looked up at it. It held a heavy stone pillar almost the length of his own arm, and its mouth was smudged with the blood of the countless humans it had devoured. Jinwoo wrinkled his brow and made his move before the giant could take a swing. Holding his daggers in his preferred reverse grip, he came to a stop between the giant's legs in a blink and slashed a dagger with all his might. SHHHHK. The black aura delivered a clean slice at the giant's thick ankle. Gah! The giant cried out in pain, wobbling until he eventually lost his balance. His humongous body tilted backward and crashed to the ground. What? Countless magic beasts behind the giant were unable to move out of the way in time, and were crushed by its weight. Next, the bug-type shadow soldiers swarmed onto the fallen giant. It struggled to swat them away, but they soon reached its face and began to feast. Ah! The giant's spasms quickly ended, but death wasn't the end of the road for it, as the Shadow Monarch gave his order once again. Arise! Growling. Due to the bug's handiwork, the shadow that slowly rose from next to the giant's body was faceless. Additional shadow soldiers crawled their way out from under the giant's corpse. These soldiers made from the corpses of dead orcs already gripped weapons in their hands as they glared at their former colleagues. The shadow army already had more than 100 additional recruits. Thud. The denizens of chaos flinched as the giant shadow soldier moved, but it ignored them. Instead, it bent over to pry the stone pillar from its corpse, reclaiming its weapon. Plop, plop. Clumps of mud fell from the stone pillar onto the ground. As if regretting not having had the opportunity to use this weapon before it died, the giant swung the weapon back as far as it could. The magic beasts, who had been relishing the war, finally realized just who they were dealing with and started to flee in terror. Jinwoo could sense their trepidation and spoke to them in the language of the monarchs. What are you afraid of? After all, his counterattack had only just begun. It was way too early for the enemy to feel this agitated. He leveled a spine-chilling glare at them. Whoosh! The giant shadow soldier swung its stone pillar at the ground, bowling the magic beasts over like tiny toy figures. Crunk! As soon as Jin Wu appeared on the battlefield, the vigilant Dragon King zeroed in on his location, the Eastern Front. The army of destruction had spread out in all directions, with the Dragon King in the epicenter, and the Shadow Monarch made his presence known at the eastern end. The ancient dragons and another monarch detected the Shadow Monarch's movements a beat later. The King of Evil Specters, the Transfiguration Monarch, addressed him. "We should have all our armies." The Dragon King raised his hand to cut him off, puzzling his subordinates. The Monarch of Destruction had been waiting with bated breath for the Shadow Monarch. So why did he hesitate even as the Shadow Monarch openly declared war? More and more soldiers were being transformed into the Shadow Monarch soldiers every second. The anxious Transfiguration Monarch, who had taken over the body of a short middle-aged human male, opened his mouth to speak but was interrupted by the Dragon King. "The Shadow Army! Where is the army of the dead?" Despite the distance, the lack of soldiers hidden in Jinwu's shadow did not escape his notice. Why would he? The Transfiguration Monarch quickly closed his eyes. Soon, a mirage of an eye appeared in midair, where the Shadow Monarch had begun his fight. The magic eye scanned everything in the area. The Dragon King was correct. The Shadow Monarch stood in the middle of a blood-drenched battlefield, but his army was nowhere to be found both in and out of his shadow. The Transfiguration Monarch opened his eyes to see the angry yet curious Dragon King. What is he up to? What was the Shadow Monarch thinking by entering the battlefield without his army to protect him? This might be their best chance to get rid of him. But the Dragon King couldn't blindly move his army without figuring out the Shadow Monarch's intentions. An all-out attack might be exactly what the enemy wanted. The uneasiness, as if his vision was hindered by fog, forced him to stay his hand. One of the ancient dragons worriedly spoke. "My lord!" Alas, a glare was all it took to compel the ancient dragons to lower their heads. The Dragon King looked toward where Jin Wu was rampaging. The armies of chaos were rapidly decreasing, while the army of the dead increased. He would have to make a call, and soon, but with the war taking an unexpected turn and the Shadow Monarch's unpredictability, he couldn't just yet. The Dragon King grimaced. "Whatever are you up to, Shadow Monarch?" At some point, there were so many enemies that Jin Wu went on autopilot as he mowed them down. Despite the speed at which his army was growing, it seemed to be nothing compared to the sheer number of magic beasts. Phew. Jin Wu took a deep breath and allowed his perception to take over his body. He was a killing machine, his body relentlessly repeating superhuman maneuvers on instinct. Hundreds of creatures were ripped apart within the blink of an eye. "Arise!" And those hundreds became new Shadow soldiers. The battlefield was coated in black shadows, like a huge tsunami swallowing the world. Each time Jin Wu moved, the sea of black grew. "Yah-yah!" Jin Wu let out a thunderous mana-filled roar, launching those in front of him. The creatures' ears bled as their eardrums ruptured, and they groaned in pain. Shadow soldiers swarmed around them before they could get a hold of themselves, and their death cries rang out over the battlefield. This had been going on for a while when Jin Wu detected a completely different type of magic beast was approaching. Above him, hundreds of flying wyverns, and the humanoid dragonfolk riding them blotted out the sky. Is this the army of destruction making its move? Jin Wu was unable to detect the presence of the Dragon King himself, but there was no need to be disappointed. He still had plenty of time. All Jin Wu needed to do was to give him a reason to join the fight. Craw! At the head dragonfolk signal, the wyvern shot straight toward Jin Wu. Energy instantly gathered inside Jin Wu. Here was an opportunity to force the Dragon King to join the fray. He would oppress the Dragon King's own subjects with a strength they could not withstand. Jin Woo stretched his hands out at the dragon speeding toward him. Ruler's authority. He concentrated this power in both hands, as if he was trying to compress the sky, and pulled something invisible down. The mana in the atmosphere responded to the Shadow Monarch's will, and the entire swarm of hundreds of wyverns and dragonfolk was slammed to the ground by unseen hands. Crunch! It was a spectacular scene. The land shook from impact. The force was so great that Jin Woo also couldn't hide his astonishment at the Shadow Monarch's unbridled power. However, there was no time to be surprised, as Jin Woo spotted a dragon that had been hidden behind the pack of wyverns. There was a glow coming from its mouth. The dragon unleashed a terrifying plume of fire. Hua! The dragon increased its altitude after its strike. It could no longer sense the enemy's presence. Had it melted the enemy to nothing? The dragon hovered at a safe altitude and scanned the area for the Shadow Monarch. When the flames died down and the smoke cleared, the Shadow Monarch was nowhere to be found. Where is he? Just then, the dragon sensed a presence above it. By the time a chill ran down its spine, it was too late. Hi! Jin Woo landed on the dragon's head and stabbed it with Kamish wrath. Crack! The dagger's aura penetrated the dragon's head down to its chin. The lifeless dragon plunged toward the earth. What? Jin Woo leaped down from the dragon's limp head. Without so much as looking back, he spoke his command as he advanced toward other magic beasts. Arise! Behind him, the dragon and hundreds of dragonfolk and wyverns rose as shadows. The Dragon King's army of destruction was leagues above the disorderly rabble of the other monarch's armies, so he was able to sense that some of his soldiers had been recruited to the Shadow Army. He could no longer stand back and simply watch out of caution. He could not allow his soldiers to be devoured by the army of the dead. We shall strike, the Dragon King declared to the ancient dragons. Follow me! Just in case, he gave a different order to the Transfiguration Monarch. Stay here and prepare for any sudden attacks from the Shadow Army. As you wish. Hundreds of gates connecting to the battlefield on the eastern front appeared before the Dragon King and his bodyguards. He'd be sure to catch the King of the Dead in his grasp. Anger burned in his eyes as he and the ancient dragon stepped through the gates. The army of destruction, which had held out against the Shadow Monarch's provocations until now, was finally on the move. Unlike the collision of superpowers on the Eastern Front, the one-sided battle on the Western Front was coming to an end. The U.S. Army, the last stronghold against the soldiers of the world of chaos, was being torn to shreds by the fangs and claws of the magic beasts. They had attempted to wield hunters' weapons, but as average, unawakened citizens, they were unable to properly use weapons that had been initially created for raid purposes. In the end, the magic beasts made short work of them. Arg! Ah! The agile and keen bug-type magic beasts led the vanguard on the Western Front as well. SHHHB. SHHHB. They quickly advanced. Bang. The bugs ignored the bullets as they pushed toward the humans and began to tear them apart. Gah! Those who survived fell back and continued their ineffective shooting sprees. But what choice did they have? Trying to face them with swords was simply unimaginable. The humans were at a loss as to what to do. Kiik. Finished with their first meal, the insects turned toward their next prey. There was nowhere to run. The grim platoon leader looked at his subordinates, who nodded back. They had been prepared for this moment ever since they were told to mobilize to buy some time for the evacuating civilians. The platoon leader took out a hand grenade and pulled the safety pin. Sensing something strange was happening, the bugs screeched and rushed at the platoon leader in a frightening frenzy. Kiik. Kiik. The platoon leader looked like a deer caught in headlights as the bugs charged at him. They reached him in a split second and opened their jaws wide, but before they could take a bite, someone jumped in front of the platoon leader, snatching the grenade from his hand as they blocked the bugs with their wide back. The platoon leader looked up in a daze at a man who was 2 heads taller than he was.
T. Thomas Andre?
Thomas winked at him and spun around to stuff the grenade into the mouth of the nearest bug. It wouldn't cause any real damage to the creature, but it would at least be surprised by the foreign object in its stomach. With a smirk, Thomas swung a large fist at the bug's head. Pow! Its headless body hit the ground quite a distance away.
Ah, well, I guess I didn't give it time to be surprised.
Thomas shrugged. Behind him, the best of the best hunters dashed forward and joined the fray. Kiik! Kiik! As the pained screeches of the bug-type magic beast spread through the battlefield, the surviving American soldiers burst into smiles as they realized just who had come to their rescue.
As scavenger, it's the Scavenger Guild. Oh, thank God.
The Scavenger Guild quickly and efficiently dealt with the situation as one would expect from the world's top hunters. But there was no time to relax with yet more magic beasts headed their way. Thomas scanned the horde. Orcs, ogres, trolls, minotaurs, cyclopses, and more, all creatures Thomas had easily dealt with in dungeons. Even considering their numbers, this was a piece of cake for him. The only problem is, there was one incredibly powerful magic beast among the trash. And just as the trash didn't dare make a move because of Thomas, he restrained himself because of it. The strong magic beast observed the situation for a while, before slowly walking forward.
Ah, you're that weak vessel who was almost killed by the Fawn Monarch.
The king of monstrous humanoids flashed a sinister grin. While the Fawn Monarch lorded over beasts and specialized in hunting, the king of monstrous humanoids ruled over human-like monsters, such as orcs and ogres, and specialized in close-quarter combat. To him, the sight of the puny human waving his tiny muscles around was laughable at best. The Iron Body Monarch released his mana to get the drop on the human, confident that he could end Thomas with a snap of his fingers. Unlike the quivering hunters behind him, Thomas still seemed fairly relaxed. What could the human possibly have up his sleeve?
This should do it, right?
Thomas appeared to be talking to himself when an inky darkness leached out from under his feet and quickly spread over the ground. The monarch's eye twitched. Shadows. That was a skill the Shadow Monarch possessed, but there was no way the Iron Body Monarch wouldn't have sensed such power in the vicinity. It was then that a familiar voice came from behind Thomas.
It has been a long while, King of Monstrous Humanoids.
Grand Marshal Bellion's polite words did nothing to mask the biting tone. Behind him, the 130,000 strong Shadow Army rose from where they were biding their time in Thomas's shadow.